My name is Clara Me Thompson, and I live in Portland, Oregon, where the air is almost always damp and everything smells of pine needles and wet earth. At 52, I've settled into a comfortable rhythm. I have a small house with a big garden where I grow heirloom tomatoes and roses that are the envy of the neighborhood. My life is quiet, ordered, and I like it that way. I've always believed that if you are careful, if you do your research and act with intention, you can protect yourself from most of life's unpleasantness. I was a librarian for 25 years before I retired, so my whole world was built on the foundation of checking sources and trusting in established facts. This story is about how that foundation was shaken to its core, and how I learned that sometimes the most effective justice doesn't come from a system, but from a quiet, well-placed word in the right ear. It all started with my mother. Her mind, once a sharp and vibrant library of family history, was beginning to fade. The stories she held, the tales of her childhood in rural Georgia, the details about our ancestors who I'd only ever seen in faded black and white photographs were starting to fray at the edges. I realized with a sudden gut-wrenching panic that if I didn't capture those memories soon, they would be gone forever, lost to the fog of time. I decided I needed to make a documentary, a video archive of her life for my children and my children's children. For this, I couldn't use my little phone camera. No, this project was too important. It required a proper video camera, one with a good lens and a sensitive microphone that could pick up the soft tremor in my mother's voice as she recalled a long-lost love or a childhood prank. These cameras were expensive, far more than my retirement budget could comfortably allow. So I turned to the internet, specifically to a huge online auction site where you could sometimes find incredible deals. I spent weeks searching, reading reviews, and learning about different models. I was meticulous, just as I had been my entire life. Finally, I found it, the perfect camera listed in something called a Dutch auction. The way it worked was that the seller had multiple identical items, in this case 5 brand new, high-end video cameras. You didn't bid against other people in the traditional way. Instead, you just placed a bid for what you were willing to pay, and the top 5 highest bidders would each win a camera at the lowest successful bid price. It seemed a bit complicated, but it also seemed fair. The seller was a man from a small town in Texas. I'll call him Kevin Sterling. I did what I always do, my due diligence. I clicked on his profile and saw a long list of positive reviews. He had a 100% satisfaction rating. People praised his fast payments and great communication. I felt a sense of relief. He seemed trustworthy, a solid seller. So I placed my bid, a number that was a significant stretch for me, but one I was willing to pay to preserve my family's legacy. I crossed my fingers and waited. A day later, an email popped into my inbox. Congratulations, you've won. A wave of pure joy washed over me. I had secured the tool that would save my family's history. I was the second highest bidder, which meant 4 other people had also won. I paid immediately, my heart thumping with excitement, and sent a polite message to Kevin Sterling, thanking him and asking for the shipping details. He replied within an hour, a cheerful, friendly message saying the camera would be on its way the next morning. I felt confident. I felt smart for finding such a great deal. I had done everything right. That feeling, however, did not last long. The next few days were filled with eager anticipation. I checked my email constantly for a tracking number, but nothing came. A week went by. I told myself that shipping from Texas to Oregon could take a while. I sent another email to Kevin, a little less cheerful this time, just gently inquiring about the status. There was no reply. Another week crawled by, the silence from his end growing louder and more ominous with each passing day. The knot of anxiety in my stomach tightened. This wasn't right. This wasn't how a seller with a perfect rating behaved. I went back to the auction site and started digging deeper, my old librarian instincts kicking in. I looked at his profile again, but this time I read the reviews more closely. A cold dread seeped into my bones. Every single one of his glowing reviews, all 100 of them, were for transactions where he was the buyer. He had spent 6 months meticulously building a flawless reputation by purchasing small, inexpensive items and paying for them instantly. He had never sold a single thing. This auction for the 5 cameras was his first and only sale. My heart sank. I realized I had been played. I was looking at the profile of a predator who had carefully groomed his account to set a trap, and I had walked right into it. I started searching online forums related to the auction site, typing in his username, Kevin Sterling TX. It didn't take long to find them. A thread had just been started by another one of the winners. His name was Mark, a college student who had spent his entire savings for the semester on that camera for his film class. Then another victim posted, a woman named Sarah who was a freelance wedding videographer just starting her business. We were all telling the same story, the initial friendly contact, the immediate payment, and then complete deafening silence. We pieced it together quickly. Kevin Sterling never had 5 cameras. He likely only had one, which he probably sold to the highest bidder, or maybe he never had any at all. He had simply taken the money from all 5 of us and vanished. My careful, ordered world began to crumble. I had been scammed. Me, Clara Me Thompson, the woman who triple-checked everything, who prided herself on her thoroughness. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I immediately started the official dispute process on the auction website. In those days, the buyer protections were not what they are today. I filled out endless online forms, submitted my payment records, and sent copies of my unanswered emails. The responses I received were cold and automated. "We are investigating your claim. Please allow 10 to 15 business days for a response." It felt like shouting into a void. While I waited for the corporate machine to grind along, my mother had a bad fall. I rushed her to the hospital, and while she was physically okay, the doctor spoke to me with a grave look in his eyes. The fall, he explained, was likely caused by a moment of disorientation. Her cognitive decline was accelerating. The news hit me like a physical blow. The clock was ticking louder and more urgently than ever before. My project wasn't just a nice idea anymore, it was a race against time. The money I had lost wasn't just money. It was time with my mother, it was stories that were now dissolving like sugar in tea. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. Anger at Kevin Sterling for his casual cruelty, but also anger at myself for being so foolish. Weeks later, the final email from the auction site arrived. They had concluded their investigation. They found that the seller was indeed fraudulent and had closed his account. But as for my money, they said it was a civil matter between me and the seller. They could not force a refund. They were sorry for the inconvenience. Inconvenience. The word was so small, so inadequate for the gaping hole of loss and frustration I felt. I was at my lowest point. I had lost the money, I had no camera, and my mother's precious memories were slipping away with each passing day. I felt utterly defeated. I sat at my kitchen table one rainy Portland morning, staring at the useless printout of the auction page. I had his name, Kevin Sterling, and because of the looser rules back then, I had managed to get his physical mailing address from the auction site's records. It was an address in a place called Harmony Creek, Texas. I pulled up a map online and zoomed in. It was a tiny speck, a small town surrounded by miles of flat, dusty land. It looked like the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and that's when it happened. The despair that had been choking me began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear, and focused thought. The system had failed me. The corporate giant had washed its hands of me. Fine, if the established channels wouldn't provide justice, I would have to create my own. I wasn't a confrontational person. I wasn't a fighter. I was a retired librarian from Oregon. But in that moment, I found a different kind of strength, a quiet, methodical resolve. He thought he was anonymous, a ghost on the internet hiding in a small Texas town. I decided I was going to turn his greatest advantage, the close-knit nature of his community, into his worst nightmare. My first move was to write a letter to the editor of the Harmony Creek local newspaper. It was a small, weekly publication called the Harmony Creek Herald. I poured all of my anger and frustration onto the page. I named Kevin Sterling, detailed his entire scam, listed the auction number, and explained how he had stolen from me and at least 4 other people. I described the college student who lost his savings and the young woman trying to start her business. I sent it off, feeling a small spark of hope. A few days later, I got a reply from the editor, a man named Mr. Abernathy. He was polite but firm. He couldn't print the letter as it was slanderous, he explained, and they could be sued. My heart sank again, another dead end. But then at the bottom of his email, he wrote a sentence that changed everything. "Ma'am," he wrote, "I sympathize with your situation. While I cannot print a direct accusation, I find that sometimes the most effective approach is to come at a problem from a different angle. This is a good town and people here look out for each other. A different angle." The words echoed in my mind. He wasn't just rejecting my letter, he was giving me a clue. He was telling me how to talk to his town. I spent the next 2 days crafting a new letter. This one was a work of art, a masterpiece of subtle insinuation. I didn't write it out of anger. I wrote it as a concerned citizen, a fellow American worried about the dark side of the new digital world. I started by praising the internet's ability to connect people, but then pivoted to its dangers. I wrote about the rise of online scams and how easy it was for dishonest people to hide behind a screen. I urged the good people of Harmony Creek to be vigilant, to protect their elderly relatives and their children from these new kinds of thieves. I encouraged them to write to their congressmen and demand stronger laws and better consumer protections. And then, deep in the body of the letter, I planted the seed. I wrote, "This issue is personal to me, as I was recently the victim of such a scam, perpetrated by a man who, according to the information I have, resides right there in your lovely town. It is a sad day when the trust between strangers, which is the bedrock of our society, is so callously broken." I ended the letter with this sentence: "I cannot name this individual in a public forum, but if any of you are concerned about this happening in your community and would like to know the details of my experience to better protect yourselves, you are welcome to write to me at this private email address." I created a brand new anonymous email account, Harmony Creek Justice, at a popular email service. I sent the new letter to Mr. Abernathy. This time, I didn't get a rejection. I got a simple one-line reply: "Look for it in this Friday's edition." The wait was agonizing. On Friday morning, I found the Harmony Creek Herald's website, and there it was, my letter, printed in full on the opinion page. I felt a thrill of nervous energy. I had cast the stone into the pond. Now all I could do was wait for the ripples. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, the first email landed in the Harmony Creek Justice inbox. It was from a woman who said she lived 2 streets over from the address I had. "Ma'am," she wrote, "I read your letter in the Herald and I just have a feeling I know who you're talking about. Does he drive a flashy red sports car that he's always polishing in his driveway, even though he only works part-time down at the hardware store?" I wrote back with one word: "Yes." The next morning, there were 3 more emails. One was from a man who had gone to high school with Kevin. "That boy was always a cheat," he wrote. "Used to copy my math homework every single day. Doesn't surprise me one bit that he grew up to be a crook." Another was from a woman who worked at the local bank. She couldn't give details, of course, but she said my letter had confirmed some suspicions she and her colleagues had been having about some recent unusual activity. The emails kept coming. It was like I had turned on a faucet. People sent me photos of his house, his car. They told me about his parents, who were apparently decent people who had moved away years ago. They painted a picture of a young man who was lazy, arrogant, and lived a lifestyle far beyond his visible means. The people of Harmony Creek were taking my vague warning and filling in the blanks with their local knowledge. They had identified the rotten apple in their barrel and they did not like it. But the final, most glorious email came about a week later. It was from an older woman named Betty. "Dear Clara Me," she began, using my name as I had signed it in my emails to them. "I am a member of the Harmony Creek Quilting Circle, and Martha Sterling, Kevin's grandmother, is one of our oldest and dearest friends. After reading your letter and hearing the talk around town, a few of us felt it was our Christian duty to pay Martha a visit. We sat with her on her porch this afternoon with a pitcher of iced tea, and we gently told her what her grandson had been up to. We showed her a printout of your letter from the paper. That poor woman, her face just crumpled. She had been giving Kevin money every month, thinking he was struggling to get on his feet. She had no idea. She started crying and said that her late husband would be spinning in his grave. She picked up her telephone right then and there and called Kevin. I couldn't hear his side of it, but I could hear her. She told him he had brought shame on the family name, that he was a thief and a liar, and that he was not to expect another penny from her ever again. She also said she was going to call his mother in Florida. I don't know if you'll ever get your money back, but I can tell you this, that young man's comfortable life in our town is over." Reading that email, I felt a satisfaction so deep and so pure it was almost dizzying. I didn't get my money back. I never expected to. But I got something far more valuable. I had been made to feel powerless by a faceless corporation and a cowardly thief. But by using my wits and trusting in the basic decency of a small town community, I had reclaimed my power. I had held him accountable in a way no lawsuit or police report ever could. His reputation in the one place he couldn't hide was shattered, not by a formal judgment, but by the whispers and disappointed glances of his own neighbors, the condemnation of his own grandmother. His social currency was gone. In a small town, that's a fate worse than jail. In the end, I saved up and bought another camera. It wasn't as fancy, but it worked just fine. I sat with my mother for weeks and I recorded her stories. I filmed her hands, wrinkled and gentle, as she showed me how to knead bread. I captured the twinkle in her eye as she told a funny story about my father. I got it all down. My mother passed away 2 years later, and that video archive is the most precious thing I own. The experience changed me. I'm still a careful person, but I'm less naive about the world. I understand that sometimes the systems we build to protect us can fail and that justice can take many forms. My little garden in Portland still grows, my life is still quiet, but now there's a steel in my spine that wasn't there before. And a few years ago, just for fun, I did an internet search for Kevin Sterling, Harmony Creek, Texas. I found a small news article from a regional paper. He had been arrested for a series of check kiting schemes in a neighboring county. The article mentioned he had a prior history of small-time fraud and was well known to local law enforcement. It seemed my little ripple in the pond had, over time, grown into a wave that finally washed him ashore. I closed the browser, walked out into my garden, and took a deep breath of the cool Oregon air, a quiet smile on my face.